The autumn sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Broken Creek as Katherine Jones stumbled out of the general store, her cheeks stained with tears and humiliation burning in her chest. The whispers followed her like persistent flies, buzzing with cruel delight at her misfortune. It was 1878, and in a town where reputation was everything, hers had just been shattered beyond repair. Catherine clutched her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to become invisible as townsfolk stopped their conversations to stare. Her auburn hair fell loosely from its pins, another sign of her dishevelment and disgrace. The letter she'd received just moments ago was crumpled in her fist, the elegant handwriting of her former fiancé delivering the final blow to her already precarious situation. "Miss Catherine," Mrs. Pemberton called out from the millinery shop, "perhaps you should consider leaving town. Some places are more accommodating to women of your situation." The suggestion was delivered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Catherine quickened her pace, her boots raising small clouds of dust as she hurried down the street. She had nowhere to go, no family to turn to, and now, no future to look forward to. The baby growing inside her, her secret shame would soon be impossible to hide. She passed the saloon where raucous laughter spilled out onto the street along with the tinny sounds of a poorly tuned piano. The bank where she'd once worked as a clerk had already replaced her with the banker's niece. Every familiar doorway now seemed closed to her. At the edge of town, Catherine paused. The open prairie stretched before her, beautiful and terrifying in its vastness. What would become of her? What would become of her child? Tears blurred her vision as she took her first steps away from the only home she'd known since her parents' death 4 years earlier. "Miss Jones." The deep voice startled her. Catherine turned to find Owen Ackerman, the town's newest ranch hand, sitting astride his chestnut gelding. His hat was tipped low against the setting sun, shadowing his face, but she could still make out his concerned expression. They'd exchanged only a handful of words in the 6 months since he'd arrived in Broken Creek to work at the Circle M Ranch. "Mr. Ackerman," she acknowledged, hastily wiping away her tears. "I was just taking some air." "With all your belongings?" he asked, nodding toward the small carpet bag she clutched in her free hand. Catherine hadn't realized she'd packed her meager possessions until that moment. Her body had made the decision her mind had been too overwhelmed to acknowledge. "I have to leave," she whispered. "There's nothing for me here anymore." Owen dismounted in one fluid motion, his tall frame unfolding as his boots hit the dirt. At 26, he moved with the easy confidence of a man who knew the land and his place in it. Unlike the other cowhands who spent their pay on whiskey and card games, Owen was known for his quiet ways and steady hand. "Mrs. Miller at the boarding house told me what happened," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "About Mr. Clayton abandoning you." Catherine flinched at the mention of her former fiancé's name. "Then you know why I can't stay. The scandal. The child." Her voice broke. "Where will you go?" Owen asked, taking a step closer, his blue eyes studying her with an intensity that made her look away. "I don't know. Denver, perhaps. Or California. Places where no one would know her story, where she could invent a dead husband and live quietly with her shame." "Alone? In your condition?" Catherine's chin lifted defiantly. "I have no choice, Mr. Ackerman, unless you're offering a better suggestion." The silence stretched between them as Owen seemed to consider something. The wind picked up, bringing with it the scent of sage and distant rain. "I have a small homestead," he said finally. "Nothing fancy, just a cabin and 40 acres along Willow Creek that I've been working when I'm not at the Circle M." Catherine shook her head in confusion. "I don't understand what that has to do with marry me," Owen said, the words simple and direct. Catherine stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "I beg your pardon?" "Marry me," he repeated. The child will have a name, you'll have a home, and I could use a wife to help make that place into something more than just a cabin in the woods. But why would you do that? We barely know each other. Owen shrugged, his broad shoulders rising and falling beneath his worn jacket. I know enough. I know you're kind to old Mrs. Hoffmeyer when everyone else ignores her. I know you helped the Sherman kids learn their letters when their ma was sick last winter. And I know you don't deserve what's happening to you now. Katherine took a step back, her mind reeling. This is madness. You can't possibly want to marry a woman carrying another man's child, a woman the whole town will soon be calling. I don't much care what this town says about anything, Owen interrupted. And as for the child? His expression softened. Children are a blessing, Miss Jones, no matter how they come to us. Katherine studied his face, searching for signs of mockery or hidden motives, but found only sincerity. Still, she couldn't accept his offer. It was too much, too unexpected, and too impossible to believe. Thank you for your kindness, she said, stepping around him. But I can't let you sacrifice your future for my mistakes. She began walking away, her back straight despite the weight pressing down on her heart. She would face whatever came next on her own terms. Katherine. The sound of her given name on his lips stopped her. In the 6 months she'd known him, he'd never addressed her so informally. We all make choices we regret, Owen said, his voice carrying across the distance between them. But sometimes the path forward isn't about walking away from our past. Sometimes it's about finding someone to walk beside us. Katherine turned, tears streaming freely down her face now. Owen stood there, his hand extended toward her, his expression earnest. You don't have to face this alone, he said. I'm offering you a partnership, not charity. I need someone as much as you do. You don't even know me, she whispered. I'd like to. His hand remained outstretched. If you'll give me the chance. She tried to walk away again, shame burning inside her. I can't. You don't understand what people will say about you if you tie yourself to me. Owen closed the distance between them in a few strides. Gently, he took her hand in his calloused one. Then we'll walk together, he said simply, and we'll face whatever comes as partners. Something in his steady gaze made Katherine believe him. Here was a man offering not romance or passion, but something perhaps more valuable, respect and companionship when she needed it most. I don't know what to say, she admitted. Say yes, he replied. We can be married by Reverend Thompson tomorrow, and I'll take you to the homestead after. It's not much, but it's peaceful there. Katherine looked down at their joined hands, then up at the darkening sky. She had no illusions about what Owen was offering, a marriage of convenience, a practical solution to both their problems. And yet, there was kindness in his offer, and maybe that was enough for now. Yes, she said finally, her voice barely audible above the prairie wind. I'll marry you, Mr. Ackerman. A smile briefly transformed Owen's serious face. Owen, he corrected. If we're to be married, I think you should use my given name. Owen, Katherine repeated, testing the feel of it on her tongue. And you should call me Katherine. He nodded, still holding her hand. Katherine. The way he said it, with quiet certainty, made it sound like a promise. The next morning dawned clear and cool, a perfect October day. Katherine wore her best dress, a simple blue cotton that had seen better days but was clean and pressed. She'd spent the night at Mrs. Hoffmeyer's small house on the edge of town, the elderly widow being one of the few people willing to offer her shelter without judgment. You're sure about this, dearie? Mrs. Hoffmeyer asked as she helped pin up Katherine's hair. Marrying a man you barely know? I'm sure it's better than the alternatives, Katherine replied, trying to keep her voice steady. Owen seems kind. Mrs. Hoffmeyer's weathered hands paused. He is that. Helped fix my roof last spring without me even asking. Quiet sort, but decent through and through. She secured the final pin. Still, marriage is a long road to travel with a stranger. I'm afraid I've run out of other roads, Katherine said softly. The ceremony at Reverend Thompson's small church was brief and sparsely attended. Only Mrs. Hoffmeyer and Mr. Peterson, the livery stable owner who had agreed to stand as Owen's witness, were present. Owen wore a clean shirt and his best trousers, his usual work clothes exchanged for something more fitting for a wedding day. Katherine felt oddly detached as she repeated the vows, as if she were watching someone else pledge their life to this tall, solemn man. When it came time for the ring, Owen produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. I didn't expect, Katherine began as he slid it onto her finger. It's yours now, he said simply. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, there was a moment of awkward silence. Owen hesitated, then leaned down to place a chaste kiss on her cheek instead of her lips. The gesture was respectful, acknowledging both the formality of their arrangement and the boundaries that existed between them. Mrs. Ackerman, Owen said afterward, testing the sound of her new name. Are you ready to see your home? The ride to Owen's homestead took nearly 2 hours, following a narrow trail that wound through rolling hills before dropping down into a sheltered valley. Katherine rode behind Owen on his gelding, her few possessions secured to a pack horse trailing behind. She held onto his waist lightly, trying to maintain a respectable distance despite the necessity of their shared mount. As they crested a final hill, Owen reined in his horse. There it is, he said, pointing to the valley below. Katherine followed his gaze and caught her breath. The small cabin sat nestled against a backdrop of cottonwoods and willows that followed the curving line of a creek. A corral and small barn stood to one side, and a vegetable garden was visible near the cabin door. It wasn't grand by any measure, but there was something inviting about the smoke curling from the chimney and the way the afternoon sun caught on the windows. It's lovely, she said honestly. Owen glanced back at her, surprise evident in his expression. It's not much, but the creek never runs dry and the soil's good for growing. Who's tending the fire if you've been in town? Katherine asked as they descended toward the cabin. That would be Hattie, Owen replied. She's the widow of the man who originally built this place, lives about a mile upstream with her son and his family. She comes by a few times a week to keep an eye on things when I'm working at the Circle M. As they approached the cabin, the door swung open and an older woman with silver-streaked black hair stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. Her dark eyes widened at the sight of Katherine. Owen Ackerman, you didn't tell me you were bringing home a bride, she called out, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. Owen helped Katherine dismount before swinging down himself. It was a recent development, Hattie, he said, a touch of awkwardness in his tone. This is Katherine, my wife. The word sounded strange to Katherine's ears, but she managed a smile as Owen introduced her to Hattie Two Rivers, whose late husband had been a Pawnee scout for the cavalry before settling in this valley. Well, this explains why you had me air out the quilts and bring over extra provisions, Hattie said, her shrewd gaze taking in Katherine's appearance. Come inside, child. You look like you could use some tea after that long ride. The interior of the cabin was simple but neat. One large room served as both kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace dominating one wall. A sturdy table with 4 chairs sat in the center, and a rocking chair was positioned near the fire. 2 doors led off the main room, one to a small bedroom, Katherine presumed, and another to what appeared to be a storage area. I'll see to the horses, Owen said, leaving Katherine with Hattie. Once he was gone, Hattie poured tea into 2 tin cups and gestured for Katherine to sit at the table. So, she said, without preamble, how far along are you? Katherine nearly choked on her tea. I don't know what. Hattie waved away her stammering. I've brought too many babies into this world not to recognize the signs. About 3 months, I'd guess. Shame flooded Catherine's face, but Hattie reached across the table to pat her hand. No judgment here, child. Life's complicated enough without adding shame to our burdens. Owen knows, Catherine said quietly. It's why he married me. To give the baby a name. Hattie studied her for a long moment. Owen Ackerman is a good man, but he's not one for impulsive acts of charity. If he married you, there's more to it than just being noble. Before Catherine could respond, the door opened and Owen returned, bringing with him the scent of horses and open air. He looked between the two women, seeming to sense the serious nature of their conversation. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Just getting acquainted with your bride," Hattie said, rising from the table. "I've left stew warming by the fire and fresh bread on the shelf. There's enough to last you a few days." She gathered her shawl. "I'll come by next week to check on you both." After Hattie left, an awkward silence fell over the cabin. Catherine remained at the table, her hands wrapped around her cooling tea, while Owen moved about, hanging up his hat and coat. "Are you hungry?" he asked finally. "A little," she admitted. They ate dinner together, the silence broken only by necessary conversation about passing dishes and compliments on the food. Afterward, Owen showed her around the cabin, explaining where things were kept and how the pump at the kitchen sink worked. "The bedroom is through there," he said, nodding toward one of the doors. "I've put fresh linens on the bed." Catherine glanced toward the door, then back at Owen. "And where will you sleep?" "I've made up a pallet in the storage room," he said. "It's comfortable enough." Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by guilt. "I can't take your bed." "You're not taking anything," Owen interrupted gently. "It's yours now. Same as everything else here." He hesitated. "Catherine, I want you to understand something. This marriage, I don't expect anything from you that you're not willing to give. We can live as friends, as partners in this homestead. Nothing more unless someday you want more." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." That night, lying in a strange bed in a strange house as a strange man's wife, Catherine wept quietly. Not from fear or regret, but from a confusing mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. What kind of marriage would this be? Could two people build a life together from such an unusual beginning? And what would happen when her child was born, a living reminder of her past mistakes? Outside the bedroom door, Owen sat at the table, listening to the muffled sounds of Catherine's crying. His hands worked steadily, whittling a piece of cedar into the beginnings of a cradle. He had much to do before winter set in, and even more to prove to his new wife that he could be the man she needed him to be. The first weeks of their marriage settled into an unexpected rhythm. Owen continued his work at the Circle M Ranch 3 days a week, riding out before dawn and returning by dusk. The other days he spent working their land, preparing for winter by chopping wood, mending fences, and harvesting the last of the garden's bounty. Catherine took to homestead life with a determination that surprised even herself. She learned to cook on the temperamental wood stove, tended the chickens Owen brought home one evening, a wedding present from the Millers at the next farm over, and began putting up preserves under Hattie's patient guidance. They were cordial with each other, sometimes even friendly, but maintained a careful distance. Owen kept his promise, sleeping in the small storage room and never presuming any marital rights. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Catherine sewing or knitting, while Owen read aloud from one of the few books they owned. It was during these quiet moments that they began to learn about each other. Catherine discovered that Owen had grown up in Pennsylvania, the son of a blacksmith. He'd headed west after the war, working his way across the country as a cowhand and occasional carpenter. "Why did you stay here?" she asked one evening in early November as the first snow fell outside the cabin windows. In Broken Creek, I mean. It's hardly the most exciting place. Owen considered the question as he turned a page in his book. I got tired of moving, he said finally. Saw this valley and something about it felt right. Like I'd found the place I was meant to be. And now you're saddled with a wife you never planned on, Katherine said, her eyes fixed on her knitting. Owen closed the book. I don't think of you as a burden, Katherine. She looked up then, meeting his gaze across the small room. What do you think of me as? The question hung between them, fraught with potential meanings. Owen set the book aside and leaned forward, his forearms resting on his knees. I think of you as my partner, he said carefully. Someone I'm building a life with. Someone I'm coming to respect more each day. Katherine's hands stilled on her knitting. Is respect enough for a marriage? She asked softly. It's a good foundation, Owen replied. Better than many start with. She couldn't argue with that. Her own parents had married for love, but she'd seen plenty of unions based on far less honorable motives than the one Owen had offered her. As November gave way to December, Katherine's pregnancy became more pronounced. Her dresses grew tight across the middle, and she experienced both the fatigue and the strange cravings Hattie had warned her about. Owen noticed but said nothing, though she sometimes caught him watching her with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. One morning, as Katherine was kneading bread dough, she felt the baby move for the first time, a definite flutter that made her gasp and press a hand to her stomach. Are you all right? Owen asked immediately, looking up from the harness he was repairing at the table. Yes, she said, smiling despite herself. The baby moved. I felt it. Something flickered across Owen's face, longing, perhaps, or curiosity. He set down his work and took a step toward her, then stopped, uncertainty evident in his posture. Would you like to feel it? Katherine offered impulsively. Owen hesitated, then nodded, moving closer. Katherine took his hand and placed it on the curve of her stomach. For several moments nothing happened, and she began to feel foolish. It might be too soon for... she began, but then the flutter came again, stronger this time. Owen's eyes widened, and a smile transformed his usually serious face. That's remarkable, he said softly, his hand warm through the fabric of her dress. They stood like that for a moment too long, close enough that Katherine could smell the soap he'd used that morning. Something shifted between them, a new awareness that hadn't been there before. Owen seemed to realize it at the same moment she did, and he stepped back, his hand falling away. Thank you, he said, his voice slightly rough. For sharing that. Katherine nodded, turning back to her bread dough to hide the flush that had risen to her cheeks. She wasn't ready to examine the feelings stirring within her, the growing appreciation for Owen's quiet strength, the comfort she found in his presence, the way her heart sometimes quickened when he smiled at her. As winter deepened, their small world narrowed to the cabin and its immediate surroundings. Snow blanketed the valley, transforming it into a wonderland of white that was beautiful, but isolating. They saw few visitors aside from Hattie, and occasionally her son Robert, who would stop by with mail or supplies from town. Christmas approached, bringing with it memories that Katherine found both sweet and painful. Last Christmas she had been engaged to Bradford Clayton, the bank manager's son, planning a spring wedding and a future that seemed secure. Now here she was, married to a man she was only beginning to know, carrying a child that would always be a reminder of her greatest mistake. On Christmas Eve, Katherine sat by the fire, finishing a small pair of booties she was knitting for the baby. Owen had gone out earlier, saying he needed to check on the animals, but he'd been gone longer than usual. Just as she was beginning to worry, the door opened, bringing with it a gust of cold air and Owen, his arms laden with greenery. What's all this? Katherine asked, setting aside her knitting. Pine boughs, Owen replied, kicking the door shut behind him. And holly I found down by the creek. I thought we might want some Christmas decorations. The simple gesture touched Katherine deeply. She helped him arrange the greenery around the cabin, the fresh pine scent filling the air and bringing back memories of Christmases past. My mother always insisted on decorating even when times were hard, Owen said as they worked. Said it reminded us that there's beauty in the world, no matter what. She sounds like a wise woman, Katherine replied. Is she still living? Owen shook his head. She passed when I was 16. Consumption. My father followed a year later. I'm sorry, Katherine said softly. My parents died in a fire 4 years ago. That's why I came to live in Broken Creek, to stay with my aunt. She passed last year. Owen's gaze met hers, recognition of their shared loss passing between them. Seems we're both orphans then. Not anymore, Katherine said before she could stop herself. We have each other now, and soon, the baby. Something flickered in Owen's eyes. Hope, perhaps, or a deeper emotion she wasn't ready to name. Yes, he agreed quietly. We do. After they finished decorating, Owen surprised her again by producing a small package wrapped in brown paper. Merry Christmas, he said, handing it to her. But I haven't gotten you anything, Katherine protested. You've made this place a home, Owen said simply. That's gift enough. Katherine carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a beautiful hand-carved wooden box. The lid featured an intricate design of wildflowers that she recognized from the meadow near their cabin. Owen, it's beautiful, she breathed, running her fingers over the polished surface. Open it, he urged. Inside the box was a silver hairbrush and mirror set. Katherine lifted them out in amazement. These must have cost. They were my mother's, Owen explained. I've been keeping them, thinking that someday, well, they should belong to the lady of the house. Tears pricked at Katherine's eyes. The gift represented more than just beautiful objects. It was Owen acknowledging her place in his life, in his home, in his future. Thank you, she whispered. I'll treasure them. On impulse, she rose and kissed his cheek, a brief touch that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through her. Owen looked startled, then pleased, his hand coming up to touch the spot where her lips had been. That night, Katherine lay awake in bed, the wooden box on the table beside her. Something was changing between them, something that both thrilled and frightened her. She had entered this marriage expecting nothing more than security and a name for her child. She hadn't expected to find herself growing fond of her quiet, thoughtful husband. Hadn't expected to look forward to his return each evening or to miss his presence when he was gone. But Bradford's betrayal was still a raw wound. He had promised to love her forever, had convinced her to give herself to him with sweet words about their future together. Then, when she'd told him about the baby, he'd revealed his true character. His family was moving to Boston, he'd explained, and he couldn't very well introduce a country wife, especially one in a delicate condition, to society there. Could she trust her heart again so soon? And even if she wanted to, did Owen feel anything beyond duty and kindness toward her? In the small storage room, Owen also lay awake, thinking of Katherine's soft lips against his cheek and the way her eyes had shone when she opened his gift. When he'd offered marriage, he'd done so out of a sense of justice and perhaps a deep loneliness he'd rarely acknowledged. He hadn't expected the quiet joy he'd found in sharing his home with her, in watching her grow more confident each day, in feeling the first movements of the child who would, in every way that mattered, be theirs. But she had been hurt badly, and her heart was still healing. He would not rush her, would not pressure her. If friendship was all she could offer, it would be enough. And if someday she could feel more, well, that was a hope he kept close to his heart. January brought bitter cold and a snowstorm that left them truly isolated for nearly a week. They spent the days in domestic harmony, Katherine sewing baby clothes from fabrics Hattie had brought, while Owen worked on furniture for the cabin, a rocking chair for Katherine, a chest of drawers for the bedroom, and, when she wasn't looking, the cradle he'd been crafting in secret. It was during this snowbound period that Katherine began to see new sides of Owen. He told stories of his travels that made her laugh, revealed a talent for sketching that surprised her, and showed endless patience as he taught her to play chess on a board he'd carved years ago. "Checkmate," Katherine announced triumphantly one evening, moving her queen into position. Owen stared at the board in disbelief, then at her, his expression comically offended. "You said you'd never played before." "I haven't," she replied, unable to suppress her smile. "But I watched my father play with the doctor when I was a girl. And you're not as inscrutable as you think, Owen Ackerman." His mock offense gave way to genuine admiration. "You're a quick study, Mrs. Ackerman. And perhaps I'm becoming too predictable." "Not predictable," she corrected. "Just knowable." Their eyes met across the board, and Katherine felt that now familiar warmth spreading through her chest. She was coming to know this man, and what she discovered only increased her respect and affection for him. The thaw came in late February, bringing with it muddy roads and the first signs of spring. Katherine's pregnancy was advancing steadily, her body changing in ways that both fascinated and alarmed her. Hattie visited regularly, bringing herbal teas for Katherine's comfort and practical advice about the coming birth. "Another month or so, I'd guess," Hattie said one afternoon as she felt Katherine's rounded belly. "The baby's strong. I can tell by the way it moves." Katherine nodded, trying to hide her nervousness. She'd assisted at 2 births in town, but the prospect of going through it herself was daunting. "Owen will send for me when your time comes," Hattie assured her, patting her hand. "I haven't lost a mother or baby yet, and I don't intend to start with you." After Hattie left, Katherine found herself restless. The cabin, which had been a haven during the winter, suddenly felt confining. She put on her shawl and stepped outside, breathing deeply of the spring air. The creek was running high with melting snow, its gurgling a constant background music to life in the valley. She walked slowly toward the small rise behind the cabin, one hand supporting her back, the other resting on her belly. The baby was active today, kicking and shifting in ways that sometimes took her breath away. At the top of the rise, Katherine paused, looking out over the valley that had become her home. The meadow was beginning to green, and she could see the first buds on the cottonwoods along the creek. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Katherine turned to find Owen walking up the hill to join her. He'd been mending fences all day but had apparently spotted her from the field. "Yes," she agreed. "It's like the whole world is waking up." Owen came to stand beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Are you feeling all right? You shouldn't be walking too far in your condition." "I'm fine," she assured him. "Just needed some fresh air. And the baby seems to like the movement." As if on cue, there was a particularly strong kick. Katherine laughed and took Owen's hand, placing it on her belly without the hesitation she might have felt months ago. His touch had become familiar, comforting. "Someone's eager to meet us," Owen remarked, his voice softening as he felt the movement beneath his palm. "Owen," Katherine said suddenly, "what will we tell the baby? About its father?" The question had been weighing on her mind for weeks. Owen was quiet for a long moment, his hand still resting on her belly. "We'll tell the truth, when the time is right," he said finally. "That I may not be the one who gave this child life, but I'm the one who chose to be its father. That family isn't always about blood, but about love and choice." Tears welled in Katherine's eyes at his words. Without thinking, she leaned into him, and his arm came around her shoulders naturally, as if they'd stood this way 100 times before. "You're a good man, Owen Ackerman," she whispered. "And you're a remarkable woman, Katherine Ackerman," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. They stood like that as the sun began its descent toward the western hills, casting long shadows across the valley. A pair of hawks circled overhead, riding the thermal currents, their occasional calls the only sound besides the distant creek. "We should head back," Owen said eventually. "It's getting cool." As they walked down the hill together, Owen's hand at the small of her back, Katherine realized how much had changed since that desperate day in October when she'd tried to flee Broken Creek. The shame that had driven her away was still there, a dull ache rather than the sharp pain it had once been, but it was now balanced by something else, a growing sense of belonging, of purpose, and perhaps even of love. Yes, love. The word that she had been afraid to even think. Was it possible that in less than 6 months she had come to love this quiet, steadfast man who had offered her a home and a future when she had none? And more importantly, could he ever love her in return, knowing how she had come to him? These questions followed her into sleep that night and into the busy weeks that followed as spring truly arrived in the valley. The baby was due any day now, according to Hattie's calculations, and both Katherine and Owen found themselves caught up in a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. Owen had finished the cradle and presented it to her one evening, its smooth pine surface gleaming in the firelight. Katherine had run her fingers over the carefully carved details, leaves, and vines that matched the design on her wooden box and found herself overcome with emotion. "It's perfect," she'd managed to say through her tears, and the pride in Owen's eyes had been worth all the discomfort of her final weeks of pregnancy. The birth, when it came, was harder and longer than Katherine had imagined possible. It began in the early morning hours of a mid-April day, with pains that woke her from sleep. By the time Owen had ridden to fetch Hattie, the contractions were coming regularly, each one more intense than the last. Hattie arrived just as the sun was rising, bringing with her a calm efficiency that helped steady Katherine's nerves. Owen was banished to the main room of the cabin, where he paced and occasionally chopped wood with furious energy when the sound of Katherine's pain became too much to bear. "You're doing well," Hattie assured Katherine as the morning stretched into afternoon. "First babies often take their time." Katherine, drenched in sweat and exhausted beyond anything she'd ever experienced, could only nod and grip Hattie's hand as another contraction seized her. It was nearly sunset when the final stage began, and Hattie's instructions became more urgent. "Push now, Katherine. The baby's coming." Katherine gathered her remaining strength and pushed, a cry tearing from her throat. Outside the bedroom door, Owen froze, his heart pounding with fear and helplessness. When a new cry filled the cabin, thin and indignant, he nearly collapsed with relief. "You have a daughter," Hattie announced, and Katherine fell back against the pillows, tears streaming down her face. After cleaning and wrapping the infant, Hattie placed the tiny bundle in Katherine's arms. "She's perfect," she assured the new mother. "Strong lungs, good color, all fingers and toes accounted for." Katherine stared down at the small, red face framed by wisps of dark hair. The baby's eyes were tightly closed, her tiny fists clenched as if ready to fight the world. A surge of love unlike anything Katherine had ever known washed over her. "Owen," she whispered. "I want Owen to see her." Hattie opened the bedroom door and beckoned. Owen entered hesitantly, his face pale with worry until he saw Katherine propped up in bed, tired but smiling, with the baby in her arms. "Come meet your daughter," Katherine said softly. Owen approached the bed as if in a dream, his eyes fixed on the small bundle. He sat carefully on the edge of the mattress, and Katherine tilted the baby so he could see her face. "She's so small," he murmured, reaching out one finger to touch the baby's cheek. "But strong," Hattie assured him from where she was tidying up. "Takes after her mother that way." Owen's gaze shifted to Katherine's face, and the love she saw there took her breath away. You were so brave, he said. I've never been more proud of anyone in my life. Without hesitation, Katherine held out the baby to him. Would you like to hold her? Owen took the infant with careful hands, cradling her against his broad chest as if she were made of the most delicate porcelain. The baby squirmed and made a small noise, then settled against him. Something in Owen's expression changed as he looked down at her, a softening, a wonder, a fierce protectiveness that brought fresh tears to Katherine's eyes. What shall we name her? She asked. Owen looked up, surprised. You haven't chosen a name? Katherine shook her head. I thought we should decide together. The significance of this wasn't lost on Owen. By including him in this most fundamental decision, Katherine was affirming his place as the baby's father in every way that mattered. Sarah, he said after a moment, after my mother. Sarah Ackerman. Katherine tested the name. It's beautiful. Hattie, who had been quietly working in the background, nodded her approval. A good, strong name for a good, strong girl. Now, Owen, you take that baby and let Katherine get some rest. She's done the hardest work a woman can do today. Owen reluctantly handed Sarah back to Katherine for one more moment, then took the baby and followed Hattie into the main room. Katherine watched them go, her heart full to bursting. As exhaustion claimed her, her last thought was one of gratitude for the strange twist of fate that had brought her to this moment, to this family that was forming around her. The next weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and joyful discoveries as they adjusted to life with Sarah. The baby thrived, growing stronger each day, her dark hair thickening and her eyes, when they finally stayed open long enough to tell, turning a deep blue that matched Owen's. Owen proved to be a natural father, as patient with Sarah's midnight cries as he was with her daytime fussing. He would walk the floor with her for hours, singing softly in a surprisingly melodious baritone when Katherine was too exhausted to get up again. You need your rest to recover, he insisted when Katherine protested that he too had work to do during the day. I can nap when she does. It was during one of these nights when Katherine awoke to find the bed beside her empty and the sound of Owen's singing coming from the main room that she realized how completely their arrangement had changed. Somewhere in the weeks before Sarah's birth, Owen had moved from his pallet in the storage room to sharing the bed with Katherine. It had happened so naturally, so without discussion, that she'd barely registered the change. They still maintained certain boundaries. Owen was unfailingly respectful of her space and never presumed upon his rights as a husband, but the physical and emotional distance that had characterized the early months of their marriage had all but disappeared. Katherine rose quietly and wrapped a shawl around her nightgown before padding to the doorway. Owen was by the window, Sarah cradled against his chest, singing a lullaby about mockingbirds and diamond rings. The moonlight silvered his profile, and Katherine felt her heart constrict with love for this man who had taken them both into his life and heart. Owen must have sensed her presence, because he turned, his song faltering. Did we wake you? He asked softly. No, Katherine assured him, moving closer. I just missed you both. Owen's smile was tender as he looked down at the now sleeping Sarah. She was restless, but I think she's settled now. Katherine reached out to smooth the baby's fine hair. You're wonderful with her. She makes it easy, Owen replied. She's a gift, Katherine. Every day with her is a gift. Their eyes met over Sarah's head, and Katherine saw in Owen's gaze all the feelings she'd been afraid to acknowledge in herself: love, hope, desire. Owen, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. Yes? His voice was equally soft, as if they both feared breaking the spell of the moment. I never thanked you properly, for everything you've done for us. Owen shook his head. You don't need to thank me. Having you both in my life, it's more than I ever thought I'd have. Katherine took a deep breath, gathering her courage. When you found me that day, Trying to leave town, I thought my life was over, that I'd never know happiness or respect again. She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I was wrong. You've given me more than just a home and a name for Sarah. You've given me a future I can believe in. Owen turned his face to press a kiss into her palm, the gesture sending warmth through her entire body. Katherine, he murmured, I need you to know something. I didn't marry you out of pity or even just out of a sense of right. I'd noticed you long before that day, your kindness, your quiet strength. I just never thought a woman like you would look twice at a rough cowboy like me. The confession stunned Katherine. You had feelings for me? Even then? Owen nodded. Not love, not yet, but something that could grow into love, given the chance. His gaze was steady on hers. And it has grown, Katherine. I love you. I love our daughter. I want us to be a real family in every sense. Tears blurred Katherine's vision as joy flooded through her. I love you too, Owen. I've been afraid to say it, afraid to trust these feelings after what happened with Bradford. But I do love you. So much. Owen carefully shifted Sarah to one arm, his other hand coming up to cup Katherine's cheek. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in their first true kiss. It was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as Katherine responded, her hand sliding up to tangle in his hair. When they finally parted, both breathless, Sarah stirred between them, making a small sound of protest at being squeezed. They both laughed softly, the tension of the moment breaking into something equally powerful, but more comfortable. We should put her down, Katherine suggested, and get some rest ourselves. The look Owen gave her made it clear that rest wasn't foremost in his mind, and Katherine felt herself blushing like a girl, despite everything they'd already shared. As they settled Sarah in her cradle and returned to their own bed, Katherine marveled at how far they had come from that desperate afternoon when she had tried to walk away from Broken Creek and her shame. Owen had taken her hand then and promised they would walk together. It was a promise he had kept in every way, through winter storms and spring floods, through the challenge of building a life together and the miracle of bringing a new life into the world. Now, as she welcomed her husband's embrace for the first time not as a friend or partner, but as a lover, Katherine knew that whatever paths lay ahead of them, they would indeed walk them together. The summer of 1879 brought abundant crops and visitors to the Ackerman homestead. Word had spread in Broken Creek about the baby, and curiosity eventually overcame the town's initial judgment. Mrs. Miller, the postmaster's wife, was the first to make the journey out to the valley, bearing a small quilt for Sarah, and thinly disguised interest in how Katherine was faring. The child is beautiful, she admitted, watching as 3-month-old Sarah kicked and gurgled on a blanket spread near the garden. And you look well, Katherine. Country life seems to agree with you. It does, Katherine agreed, serving tea in the cups she'd carefully unpacked from the crate that had arrived the previous week, a belated wedding gift from Owen's cousin in Pennsylvania. Mrs. Miller's visit opened the floodgates. Soon, other town women found reasons to call at the homestead, bringing small gifts and taking back stories of the contentment they found there. Even Reverend Thompson made the journey, expressing his pleasure at seeing the family thriving. God works in mysterious ways, he commented, watching Owen show off the new irrigation system he'd designed for the vegetable garden. Sometimes what seems like our greatest trial becomes our greatest blessing. Katherine, holding Sarah on her hip, could only agree. The shame that had driven her from town had led her to this life, this love, this family that grew stronger each day. By Sarah's first birthday, the past had lost much of its power to hurt. Bradford Clayton's name was rarely mentioned, and when Katherine thought of him at all, it was with a distant pity rather than the sharp pain of betrayal. He had missed out on knowing his daughter, on seeing her first smile, hearing her first word, Dada, directed unmistakably at Owen, witnessing her first tentative steps. The celebration of Sarah's birthday coincided with their own first anniversary, and Owen surprised Catherine with another gift papers showing that he had officially purchased the adjoining 50 acres, expanding their homestead. For the future, he explained as they sat on the porch after putting Sarah to bed. I want to build something lasting, something we can pass on to Sarah and… He hesitated, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. And any brothers or sisters who might come along? Catherine leaned against him, her hand finding his in the gathering dusk. I'd like that, she said softly. A house full of children, all with your eyes and your kind heart. Owen turned to look at her, his expression serious. Any regrets? He asked. About how things turned out? Catherine considered the question, thinking back to the frightened, shameful woman she had been that October afternoon. None, she said with absolute certainty. How could I regret the path that led me to you? Owen's kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of all they had built together. I was thinking, he said when they parted, that we might make a trip into town next month. Sarah should meet more people her age, and I'd like to show off my beautiful wife and daughter. The suggestion would have terrified Catherine a year ago, but now she nodded. I'd like that. And perhaps we could visit the general store. I hear Mr. Parker just got in new fabric from back east. Planning to sew new curtains? Owen teased, knowing her weakness for pretty textiles. Perhaps, Catherine replied mysteriously. Or perhaps something smaller. Baby clothes, for instance. Owen went very still beside her. Catherine, are you saying… She turned to him, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. Hattie confirmed it yesterday. We're having another baby, Owen. Around Christmas? She thinks. The joy that spread across Owen's face was all the response she needed. He gathered her into his arms, his laughter mingling with hers in the cool evening air. I love you, Katherine Ackerman, he whispered against her hair. More than I have words to say. And I love you, she replied. My cowboy who wouldn't let me walk away alone. As darkness settled over the valley and the first stars appeared overhead, Catherine thought of all the steps that had brought them here, some faltering, some certain, but all necessary to create the life they now shared. She thought of Sarah, sleeping peacefully in her crib, and the new life growing within her. She thought of the years ahead, with all their unknown joys and sorrows, and felt no fear. Whatever came, they would face it together, hand in hand, just as Owen had promised on that fateful day when she had tried to walk away in shame, and he had taken her hand and said, We'll walk together. And they did, for all the days of their lives.